All right, welcome back to the I Believe podcast. I'm your host, Danae, and I'm joined with two patients today, and we're going to be talking about giving your diagnosis direction. I've got Lucy Innes here and Lindsay Brown, and these ladies have been guests on the I Believe podcast before, so if you've listened to their episodes, say hi. If you want to go listen to their past episodes, they're both wonderful speakers, and Lucy talked a lot about the immune system in a previous episode. She really broke it down and just easy to understand terms. And then Lindsay has shared her story about really kind of some of what we're going to cover today. But she is a speaker, and so she's shared a little about her keynote speech that she has started giving. And I'm super excited to get to talk to them because these are two ladies in our community who I feel like have done such a fantastic job of giving their diagnosis of ocular melanoma some kind of direction and some meaning. And I'm really hopeful that this will be an episode that if you're listening, that you'll find maybe a little extra purpose behind what's going on in your diagnosis. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to make it better, but I think it does improve, how our mental state happens, and really just how we're able to navigate everything. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. One of the things that I'm really excited to talk through is for everyone who's listening in who just feels like they're just stuck. I feel like conversations like this can really pull you out of that and pull you out of the spiral. And so I'm hopeful that we can lend some inspiration and motivation to anyone who's just really in need. I'm sure we all
Yeah.
are.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for being here. To start off, can I actually have both of you just kind of give us a brief recap of your story with ocular melanoma? Maybe give us, just diagnosis date. I guess you could say age of diagnosis if you feel like sharing, and then kind of where you're at today.
Yeah.
Lucy, I'm going to let you go first.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed 3 years ago, so I think I was 22. I just started a PhD program doing biology research already, not specifically in the cancer field, but sort of actually kind of adjacent to that. And, at first I was really kind of like, I don't want to do anything. I don't even want to think about uveal melanoma, obviously, like it's such a, but I ultimately wound up, that was all I could really think about at work was like reading these papers. And so that was really what sort of struck me on the path of making that the direction for my diagnosis.
No, it's amazing. And so, Lucy, you started off with a diagnosis and you were already in college, right? Like you were already going to college for your PhD program. And then now since then you've kind of evolved your studies, which we can get into that a little bit more. But Linz, do you want to tell us a little more about your diagnosis story and where you're at today?
Yeah, sure, sure. So I was diagnosed in 2022, in May. Had my eye enucleated 2 weeks later in June of 2022. And since then, 18 months after diagnosis, metastasized to my liver. And I've since done immunoembolization, chemoembolization, PHP or the Hepzato kit, and I'm now thankful that the Rogi trial exists because I'm currently enrolled in that. So it's been a wild ride these last couple of years, but I'm coming up on my fourth anniversary next year, which is amazing, and I feel really good about still being able to find purpose and passion in all of this. And so I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. And you know what, guys? I'm going to jump in because sometimes people don't realize that I'm a patient too. And I am also someone who I feel like has found some ways to, well, some really significant ways to give my diagnosis a direction. Obviously, I'm here hosting the I Believe podcast, and that's one of the big things that I've done. But I was diagnosed just over 5 years ago in the summer of 2020 with a tumor in my right eye. That was treated, and then a couple years later, I metastasized to my liver as well in the summer, and I have done kind of a mixture of spot treatment and disease management, just kind of hoping that I'll stay NED as long as possible. I've done histotripsy, which is a newer ablative type of procedure, and then I have also been doing. Coming up on my fourth cycle of Hepzato kit, so I get it. Like lots of things to manage, and it is definitely a different ball game to have regular treatment, I think, than to have it like spread out a lot. So anyway, okay. So let's talk a little more about what each of you guys have done, because I want to get back to what Lucy mentioned. Like she mentioned how there was this period of time that you kind of were like, I don't want anything to do with uveal melanoma. So what changed, Lucy? Like why did you change and kind of switch your focus? Because I think that's significant.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, I mean, a big part of it was at first, like, it's so scary. It's so, like, I think very upsetting in a lot of ways. And it was like, I think I was a little traumatized for a little bit of just like a little shell shocked, a little like, you know, I feel like there's so much you have to reevaluate about your life. And, I think sometimes it sort of feels like a bad dream. And then at a certain point, it starts becoming normal. And, like, I don't think there's like one, like, point you can point, there isn't like one day you can point at where it's like, oh, that was the day it, like, kind of just became my new normal. I feel like it obviously comes along gradually, but for me, it was like I think I was going through these cycles of like, I don't want to think about it, and then obsessively thinking about it and reading about it. And, I had this whole toolkit about how to like obsessively read about something that I probably shouldn't be obsessively reading about. And so I think there's a bit of sort of maybe an unhealthy amount of avoidance and obsession. And then at a certain point, like, I started coming up with more, a lot of the starting a PhD is like thinking of projects, thinking of research projects, thinking like trying to figure out what do I want to spend the next couple of years of my life doing. And it sort of went from being this kind of chaotic, like scramble in my head to like actually coming up with more like cohesive ideas of potential projects I could do. And at a certain point, I think the big moment, the catalyst was when I actually went in for my radiation, my yeah, because I had a couple different like treatments that kind of shrank the tumor at first, but like at a certain point, like no, we gotta irradiate. They went and actually, when he took the biopsy, I was like, can I have a little bit extra to like bring back and put in my lab? And he was like, yeah, sure. I still don't even know if that was legal, but so maybe let's look that up and cut that part out if it's not.
It's okay. I mean, I asked if I could keep my eye, like when it was enucleated. I was like, so can I keep it? And they were like, no, but you can have a picture.
But yeah, basically, I was able to like take that, take a little piece back to bring into the lab, and honestly, I haven't even done anything meaningful with it. It was frankly just too little material to actually do anything with, but having that there, I think was what really like was like, okay, like this is absolutely what I have to do with like this amazing opportunity I have. Like I'm obviously unlucky in so many ways, but I felt really, really lucky in one way of being put in a position, in like such a unique position to be able to research this disease that's so under researched.
Lucy, thanks so much for sharing. Linz, can you go ahead and tell us a little more about what's kind of shifted for you? Because I know the first time we recorded an episode with you, you talked a little more about your previous profession, and I think that it's kind of evolved since then.
Yeah, yeah. So before diagnosis, and I still am very much ingrained in the healthcare space and the acute care space, more on the sterile processing end of things. And for those of you who don't know what sterile processing is, it's the people in the hospital who clean and sterilize surgical instruments to get them ready and safe for a surgical procedure. So talk about full circle when I actually was a patient for the first time, sort of. Benefiting from all of the hard work that sterile processing professionals do, knowing that my surgeon was super talented, but there was a whole team of people behind her who had to do their job well in order for her to be successful. It just was that moment where I was like, holy cow, this is why I do what I do.
Yeah.
And so I had been speaking in the healthcare space for many, many years prior to diagnosis, but I spoke about things like how to pick the proper cleaning brush for your surgical cannulas and endoscope reprocessing and very niche clinical content, and that was sort of my space. But when I was diagnosed, I just felt this call to do something um, that sort of transcended industry. And so I put together a keynote talk about the preciousness and renewability of time. Because to Lucy's point, like all of a sudden, this terrifying thing happens. And it's pure chaos in your brain and outside of your brain because you're trying to learn a new language, essentially, trying to figure out what all these acronyms are and what all these medical terms are for a cancer I didn't even know existed. And so now you're presented with an opportunity to either lean in or let it completely derail you or figure out a way to find balance. And in order to find that balance, I took my love of public speaking and really put a lot of energy into building a keynote talk about the preciousness and renewability of time, and sort of a call to action for people to assess how their life and how their energy is being shared, and to figure out if it's being shared with the things that are high on your values list. Because when I did that assessment after diagnosis, I was like, well, crap. I'm sharing a lot of time with stuff that just does not matter in the grand scheme. And so it was that reevaluation that really helped sort of catapult me into the keynote speaking space, and really helped me find a topic that meant something like bones deep to me, and was really easy to share and connect about when I get in front of an audience of people. So that's one of the ways that I've sort of made the energy that I had been feeling, that kind of like scared, chaotic, like fearful energy, like sort of gave it direction and gave it purpose, and sort of allowed it to shift into something really positive and really serving.
Yeah, no, and I've heard Lindsay's talk just in recordings and in her, like hearing her talk about it and just little clips on Instagram. And it's really such a good, solid reminder of like why it's so important to be present, right? Like to be present with our
Hmm.
lives and to like I love what you said about values, like to choose like what is it that we value. And I think at the end of the day, that's what giving your diagnosis direction does. It's assigning some level of like high value to like what's the most important stuff in your life, and
Yeah.
then using those things as, I don't want to say like a reason to keep living, right? Like because obviously like, we obviously all want to keep living, but sometimes the fear can overshadow everything else. And I think that
Hmm.
that's really kind of where this comes for full circle for each of us, is that we found some way to combat the fear. um, and because it's not like we don't feel the fear. Like I'm positive each of you still feel the fear. I think like Luce, you talked about like one of the times that you had scans recently and how kind of just how messed up you felt, like anxiety wise. You just felt like you couldn't focus on anything. And like I know Linz and I talk a lot about what we have going on treatment wise with metastatic disease, and that's a
Yeah.
whole new level of fear.
Hmm.
It was scary when it was just scans, and it's a whole lot scarier when there's actually stuff going on and you have to like be figuring that out. And it's not like one is more scary than the other, but it's just a different type of feeling. But
Hmm.
I think that finding those ways, those little ways that we can give ourselves something else to focus on is huge. I'm a little in the camp of Lucy. I ended up about 6 months into my diagnosis with just my eye being diagnosed. My boss found me on Instagram and on Facebook, and she was like, you're really doing such a good job of sharing your story. Like you have such a good audience, and like people seem to really listen to what you have to say. And I was just like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I just am essentially sharing vulnerable things. Like, I'm just sharing my vulnerable story. But that was, I guess it all kind of started with the idea that I wanted to be able to share my story in a way that, hopefully what I was doing, how I was navigating this diagnosis could eventually be somebody else's survival guide, like in the future. I don't know if that makes any sense. Um, but that was kind of why I was posting, right? Why I was posting on social media. And and posting on social media in some ways was a little bit of like a diary. But it then kind of shifted and evolved to really heavily working in advocacy and working with the Cure Insight to be an advocate for our disease, but also to be an advocate for patients, like to help their voices get out there. And so we gather a lot of patient stories on the I Believe podcast, and that's been like a passion project of our team to make sure that we can give patients a voice all across the world. And it's been such an honor to be able to connect with so many patients. And I mean, there are absolutely some times, right, that I kind of want to stick my head in the sand and just pretend ocular melanoma doesn't exist. But then I get back into another interview, or I'm at an event, or I help host a 5K here in Scottsdale, or just whatever it is. I meet another patient. And even though like it can be emotionally taxing to like be present for some of these people and with the people in our community, and even just to like learn, right? Because I learn a lot from talking with the doctors and talking with the people who are in pharma and doing like the biotechnology research. I learned so much, and like the mental weight of all of that can sometimes be a lot. But I've learned over the last 5 years, like, how to set good boundaries for myself. And when it all kind of comes back to, do I want to not do this anymore? The answer is like, no, like this is part of what makes me feel like, I don't know, like there's a reason for Ocular, for me to be involved, right? Like there's a reason, and that I have something really unique to contribute to the ocular melanoma community. And that meaning, right, that choice to believe that my voice matters is huge in how I approach my own care, right? Because I have a ton of people in my corner, of course, like in just knowing people, but I have learned so much, and I see the value of like giving people their voice back. And it makes it that much easier for me to advocate for myself, like in a medical setting. So like there just are like real life consequences of choosing, to do something specific with your diagnosis. And it, like, I don't, like, I think, I obviously work in ocular melanoma, right? That's my job. Lucy, like, that's what you do right now. Like, your whole schooling career is on the biological research behind ocular melanoma, like the cellular level of this. But Linz, like, you don't specifically keynote for people who are only ocular melanoma patients, right? Like, you speak to audiences all across the country.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, what's interesting though is like I feel like I'm being put in front of audiences where there's some sort of connection to ocular melanoma. Like, there have been multiple times where, after one of my keynotes, someone comes up to me and is just in tears because they too have ocular melanoma. And there has been, times where I inadvertently sat next to a woman who recently lost her daughter to ocular melanoma right before I gave my keynote, and we didn't realize it until after the keynote was done. So things like that happen all the time for me. So even though like the topic has nothing to do with ocular melanoma, I share part of I share part of my story in a very small part of the presentation, but the overall takeaway has nothing to do with ocular melanoma. So to find myself, universally put in front of people who can relate on a different level has been such a gift to me too, because it makes me feel like I'm doing exactly what I should be doing, and exactly what I was meant to do. So yeah, it's been really cool.
Yeah, no, it's such a unique experience, I think, to just really lock in with what you think your purpose is, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe one of the gifts, right? Like, this diagnosis could be really debilitating for each of us, and we could just ignore it the whole time until it, shows up for scans or shows up for a doctor's visit. And it's not that that's necessarily the worst thing you can do. It's just that I think that the experience we have with life is infinitely different. Lucy, what were you going to say?
I didn't have anything in particular, but that was making me think very much like personally. I feel like my doctor was really, the way that he sort of approached me. I think because I got my like test results back and it showed I'm pretty much the best prognosis you can get, and I think he really was hoping that I would just sort of like go off and not think about it. I was always like, oh, like, should I do this? Should I do that? He was just like, just go home and like you're like don't worry about it.
Go
And of
live
course,
your life.
yeah, and of course, no, like I didn't do that. I did the exact opposite of that. But I think for me personally, I'm somebody who just takes great comfort in like really understanding what could happen, and like honestly, I feel like Danae, one thing that really like I love about how much you post is like I feel like there's so much that feels like it's like behind a screen around what is metastatic disease like, and like actually seeing like this is what this treatment is like, this is what like you're gonna have this like scar right here and a bruise right here. It's like it makes it so that like if that ever happens to me, I'll know what to expect. And I feel like part of the research is sort of taking control of like, okay, I kind of know what to expect, and that gives me a lot of comfort. Obviously not everybody would feel the same way, but I feel like that was something that really worked for me.
Well, I want to draw a point to something that you just said. You said control, right? It gives you some sense of control. And I think that that's something that each of us in giving your diagnosis some kind of direction, like giving yourself a direction to follow, whether it has to do with your diagnosis directly, like working in the advocacy space or working in research, or just because of, right, as a result of your diagnosis, that you lean into doing something that kind of fits your purpose, fills your cup differently. I think that the thing that maybe makes that the most helpful is this idea of controlling something, right? It becomes something like something that you have some level of control over. I don't have control over what looks like, what my scans look like or what my blood tests look like. I don't have control of exactly how well I respond to treatment. Those kinds of feelings, that fear that comes up, the uncertainty is it's so frustrating sometimes because I'm definitely a control person. I like to have control. And to have something to put my focus into that I can control, right? I can control how much I show up to my job. I can control choosing the patients that I want to interview or talking to the doctors. There's a lot of things that I get to control within the scope of what I do and where I've found a lot of meaning and purpose. And I think that sense of control, it's like taking your power back. And I think that's so important for each of us. Lindsay, it
Yeah.
looks like you've got something to add.
Yeah, yeah. Well, along with control, it also gives you a sense of like, it keeps you from that feeling of like, if I'm going to die soon, what's the point?
Mm.
It keeps you out of that spiral to have something to to push yourself with, to challenge yourself with, and to plan for, and to like, set goals around that are very future forward. Because with something like this, it's really easy to get stuck in that spiral of, well, what's the point? Because the prognosis for this is not good, and I know all the statistics that exist, and if you're part of any of the online groups, you see, the people who lose their lives to this disease, and it's like it's really easy to get stuck in all of that and get stuck into that part of diagnosis. And I think part of finding purpose in your diagnosis is being able to see a path forward. And I think that that's just such a healing, um, sort of, I don't know, it's like a healing exercise almost, to just allow yourself to dream a little.
Yeah. No, I think you mentioned forward focus. And I think that that's also really, really important. It's so easy to get caught up in the fear and
Mhm.
when's my next scan? What's it going to show? Is my eye tumor shrinking? Are my liver tumors shrinking? Like, what's going on? It's so easy to get caught up in that being kind of like what you live for. But if you have a purpose, right? If you have given yourself some kind of direction outside of your diagnosis, right? I can't remember which interview it was that we were doing, but I've talked a few times about this idea that like we don't have to give cancer any more time than it's scheduled for.
Right. Yeah.
And so when I say that, I mean like all of the scary things, right? All of the doctor's appointments, all of the scanxiety, all of it. Like we don't have to
Hmm.
give it more attention than it is scheduled for. But if we don't have purpose and, a sense of direction outside of it, then it can really feel like it's driving your whole life because it's like you're just living for the next scan. You're living between
Yeah.
things. And if you can kind of flip the focus and find things to plan for in the future, like,
Hmm.
I mean, I find a lot of comfort in just thinking forward, even if it's just a couple months, right? Like, oh, we're going to take a family vacation in a couple months. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to that. Um, Anyway, so Lucy, I kind of wanted to ask you. I mean, we don't have to quote exact studies, but I guess my understanding is that patients' attitude and mentality and just our mental state can really heavily influence our immune systems. And that, there can be a positive correlation. Not necessarily that like having a good attitude is going to like cure your cancer, but just this idea that people who are, I guess, not so down in the dumps or maybe just not so caught in the pit of despair all the time, like they're gonna respond better to treatment, they're gonna feel better, they're gonna have better quality of life, like those kinds of things. So I don't know, like just from an immune system standpoint, like do you think there's good value in giving yourself purpose and goals and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am not an expert in the topic, but certainly like I mean, sort of chronic stress sort of convinces your body that your immune system that it has more important things to focus on than healing and whatever that may be, either you know helping you be in the best state you could be in to get a therapy, or maybe your immune system might be weakened by like if you're stressed and thinking it might be basically in history, right? If you're really stressed all the time, it might be because there's like a bear right outside your cave or whatever, right? forgive my example.
No, it's
And so
fine.
you're not going to be thinking, your body is not going to be like, okay, how do we prevent cancer right now? It's more like, okay, what do we need to do to survive this immediate threat? And like constant anxiety, fearing your next scan, our brains can't really distinguish between, a bear outside your cave and like a scan coming up. Doesn't realize that those are totally different stressors, and so you still might be fearing this scan, and it's still making your body go, let's focus on this immediate threat and not focus on taking care of our, cellular health. And so obviously I don't want to like, it's hard to say like, oh, don't stress. I think
No,
my
for
doctor
sure.
was like, reduce stress. And I was like, are you kidding me?
That's definitely such a tricky thing, and we don't need to get like tons into that, but it's
Yeah,
not so much this idea that like we shouldn't ever feel stress, because that's impossible. We're gonna feel fear. We're
totally.
gonna feel the stress of our diagnosis, and so you guys listening, like, please don't take that as like, don't feel stress. Stress is bad. Like, I feel like that's one of the worst things that anybody says to cancer patients. It's like, no, don't tell us that. Like, we don't need that. All that does is add to our stress. Thanks.
Exactly.
But it does really make such a big difference, I think, just in your ability to show up to your treatment, to show up to your doctor's appointments. If it's not as scary feeling because you've done the work, or you have, maybe a different focus outside of it, you have something to look forward to. There's a lot. I feel like there's a lot of benefits to just the goal setting and the forward focus. But Lindsay, it looked like you might have had something else to add.
Oh yeah, it's just related to that idea of fear. That's one of the things that I talk about in my keynote, is fear being an acronym that stands for forgetting every available resource. And like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard phrases like fear and hope are both about something that hasn't happened yet, and like you get to choose, which one you want to, make your reality, and things of that nature. But I think when you feel those big scary feelings, like fear, one of the things that's been super helpful to me is like, okay, I know I'm feeling fear in this moment, like what resources am I forgetting about, that can help me cope, that can help me prepare, that can help me feel calm, that can help my nervous system adjust. Like, there's just a lot of power in understanding that it, I'm feeling this big, scary feeling about something that hasn't even happened yet. Like,
Yeah.
and that I don't know the outcome to. And so, is that where I want to put my energy? And 10 times out of 10, it's a no from me, dog.
No, like, you don't need to suffer twice. Like, that was one of the things that my mom told
Right.
me years ago. She
Yes.
was like, when you're feeling anxiety about something that hasn't even happened, when you're like kind of catering to fear, you're basically just feeling you're feeling it twice. You don't need to feel the
Right.
devastating
Yeah.
fallout of something that hasn't even happened or been confirmed. I think
Hmm.
that's where, I can't remember which of you, I think it was Lucy. I think you mentioned like some healthy level of like denial. I think that's where denial comes in, that it can be
Yeah.
healthy. It can be healthy to be like, yeah, but that's not really real. Like, that's, I think that was where I lived. Like, when I first had news that I had metastatic disease, it was suspected. It wasn't confirmed with a biopsy. And I basically spent the entirety of the next 2-3 months from August to when it was biopsied in November. Maybe that's more. August to September, September to October, October. Yeah, 3 months. I spent the entirety of that time basically like, until they do a biopsy and they confirm that this is melanoma, like, I don't believe it. It's innocent until proven guilty. Like, and
Yeah.
that helped because it switched the fear from being something that I was constantly thinking about to just being able to be present with what I had going on in life. And I think that, when we give ourselves some kind of direction, outside of just focusing only on ocular melanoma, that's the whole point, right? It helps us to be more present with our life and to be more present with the people who are important in our lives. And that is such a gift. I feel like every patient that I've ever talked to, they always talk about how important presence becomes. And I think sometimes it becomes something we get, I don't know, like the initial event, right? The initial event of being diagnosed is something that triggers this desire for more presence. And then the longer you go in your diagnosis, if you have waves of stability or you have things that change, like, you experience different levels of how present do I need to be. And sometimes we just, it's human nature. I think we just forget, like, we just forget like why it was so important to be present and to spend our time like where it's most valued.
I love what Lucy said earlier, where it's like eventually you get to a point where you're just existing in this new normal and you're not sure when that switch was made. There's
Mm-hmm.
not one moment or one day that you can pinpoint where you're like, oh, that was the day this became normal.
Yeah.
But it's true. You do get to a point where it's like, well, this is just like these are the cards I was dealt, and it is now in my power and in my control to either do something good with it or let it destroy me. And I think that that's a choice. It's a hard choice and it takes a lot of energy. And do I still have spiral days? 100%.
For sure.
And I now have, coping mechanisms that can pull me out of those spirals. One of them being my husband. He is my most powerful coping mechanism to get out of those spirals. But yeah, it's kind of interesting when you think about it in those terms. Like it it doesn't ever stop being scary, especially when you have a scan coming up, or especially if you have a clinic visit coming up that you don't know, what's going to be said or shared with you. And also, like, then you leave those visits and you go back to your new normal, and hopefully do something that brings you joy.
Yeah. I feel like it comes down to like ultimately some degree of acceptance, right? That there's kind of varying degrees of acceptance that we go through as a cancer patient. And acceptance is such a huge piece of being able to navigate our disease no matter where you are and no matter how many times it's changed, right? Like you can be navigating all of the roller coasters of metastatic disease and you're still going to have to find some level of accepting what is happening and that you just have to accept that it is what it is. It doesn't mean like I feel like acceptance sometimes gets confused for this idea that like, well, that means that I'm just giving up, right? That I'm
Mhm.
accepting what it is, and that means therefore I don't believe I have the power to change it, or I don't believe that something else could change it. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's just that you stop dwelling so much on all of these things that are outside of your control that ultimately just make you miserable to focus on.
Yeah.
And you start focusing on the things that bring you joy. You start focusing on the things that you're passionate about. And when you focus on those things, the other stuff is still there, but it's just not as big. And I think
Yeah.
that's really what is so powerful about having purpose outside of just, oh, I've got to get to my doctor's appointments.
Yeah. It's really easy to just take ocular melanoma and put it on as your new and solo personality. Because it is a rare cancer and because, the people around you are well-meaning and likely asking how you're doing with everything and what's the latest in treatment and like all of these things. So you're constantly reminded that is a big part of your life, even if you don't feel that, you know, it- on any given hour of the day, you have that constant reminder. And I think it was really freeing when I finally started to feel like ocular melanoma wasn't the only thing that defined me. Um, and it took a while to get there.
So now that you have gotten there,
Hmm.
for the most part, I think we're kind of sometimes evolving in that
Right.
department. But now that
Hmm.
we've maybe gotten to that point where like we no longer feel like ocular melanoma defines us as a person, like where do you feel like you're at right now, Lucy? Like in terms of just coping with your diagnosis and dealing with the curveballs that can come up while also still keeping that forward focus. Like I guess what keeps you going every day?
I mean, I think like in terms of, I guess that like some stuff I've been thinking about as we've been talking is like I was kind of thinking like, a lot of times I think about like why exactly am I researching this disease? Is it because like I want to come up with a therapy that's going to save my own life maybe down the line? Like realistically, no. Like realistically, like I know that science moves too slow for that to like the timing to even make sense there. Is it hoping to make treatments for other patients maybe in the future? Like certainly, but a lot of the time I'm just doing my job because it's my job. Like I chose like day to day I'm not thinking about my own life, other people's lives. Like I'm just thinking about how to get my stupid cells to behave or like this assay to work. And I feel like it's so funny because I think at first obviously it was like kind of loaded. I was like, am I gonna like work myself to death trying to get something out of this? And like part of it is that's just not me. Like I'm just not that kind of person. I was never going to be a workaholic, no matter how much, it really meant. And so I think I've been really blessed with maybe a good temperament about it and being able to like really separate it from my life a lot of the time and just having it be a job, and that I love. And then, when every once in a while, like situations like these, I can, and at the Kieran site, I believe conference, I can really see like who is this impacting? Like, who can this benefit? And I think that's sort of my like, after some time has passed and I'm a little bit, I actually, I think with, I'm 3 years after treatment at this point, that's sort of like my settled into my new normal.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Oh, I think it's so interesting, and it's honestly, it's super inspiring for me to like observe just the various patients that I see who have some level of involvement either in ocular melanoma or just have found some way to just kind of contribute to the greater world, I think, and just kind of leave their mark. And I think it's so special. Like, it's kind of like each of us has, we all have our own fingerprints, and the imprint that we leave on the lives of the people around us is so unique. And so, Lucy is a researcher. Linz is a speaker. Like, I do advocacy work, and I guess, I do what I do here. Like, neither of us or none of us are more important to the world than the other, but we are all contributing in some unique way. So Linz, like for you, you're in the middle of metastatic management, dealing with metastatic disease. What does the gift of having developed a keynote and being a speaker, what does that give you now in the middle of dealing with clinical trials, travel, all the fun things that come with getting treated?
Yeah. Well, what's really powerful is like I need the reminder too to be intentional and to be present and to approach time as though it's not the villain in my story. And so every time I give my keynote, I walk away and I'm like, oh, I forgot, like maybe it had been a couple, really hard months in between. And so giving the talk and seeing other people connect to the message is only a part of it. Like I also need those same motivations and inspirations that I talk about. And so it's been such a gift um, to see other people connect to it, but then also have sort of a scheduled reminder and a scheduled, almost like a self-therapy session for myself when I'm on stage to just be like, yeah, this is the reason. Like these are the reasons why you're shifting your mindset and you're being more intentional. And this is why perspective is so important. And Danae, you're in the same boat as me. We have young kids watching. We have young kids watching our process and our healing journey and watching us navigate something that's really, really hard. And in my mind, them being able to see me still do the things that I love to do and that bring me joy and that bring meaning to my life, um, can is in real time teaching them that they can also do really hard things and still be okay. And that to me, I think is the most powerful thing in all of it is like my kids get to see me still be okay and still thrive, um, even in the midst of everything that is metastatic treatment management.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's so important. And I'm going to kind of just echo what you said. For me, the reasons maybe that this still is something that I find so much value in as a patient is, I get to be really on the, the front row seat to hope, I think. And that comes from talking to patients and hearing people's stories, hearing like incredible stories of people's survival, right? People who beat all the odds, right? And who are still here today, or just to hear of them. But also to hear and just talk to and develop relationships with doctors who are currently researching this disease and with the pharmaceutical companies who are investing in trials and trying to make sure that we have treatments. And, but as a patient, it really gives me, I think, a front row seat to hope, because I can, in some ways, like I feel a little selfish because sometimes I find out about things, right? I've known about like the trial that you're on, Linz. I've known about it for probably a year and a half but I wasn't really able to like super talk about it because it wasn't recruiting actively in the States yet. It was still only in Europe. But knowing that things are coming and having the ability to connect with doctors who are, making sure that I am aware so that like we can talk about it in the future and we can get that knowledge out to patients. It's so rewarding and also like helpful for me when I'm in a dark place or when I'm feeling really frustrated. It reminds me that like, okay, like we have not exhausted, like to quote a book, Lindsay, you'll know which book it is, but like to quote a book, like it is not like we have not exhausted every possible path yet. And I think that's so helpful to me. And that's kind of the definition of resilience for me is that, okay, we're going to follow every possible path. We're going to get up every single time that, we get knocked down. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean that you're not like clawing your way to the surface sometimes, but like it is possible. And, I can't remember. I think it was my mom. She said something about like you have 100% record, like 100% track record for getting back up every single time you've had something hard, like a new kind of thrown at you, be it from cancer or otherwise. Like you have 100% track record of making it through it. And so like that is such a good reminder, I think, especially because I think our brains kind of trick ourselves into thinking, oh, like we've never handled this situation before. So therefore, like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Like, I don't know. But I do really feel like having the space that I have to, to work in and show up, even if I don't have the capacity to do that as much as I would like to sometimes, it still is such a helpful thing for making sure that I stay in the mindset of like hope and belief in the future. And I think, I think it's so important for my kids to be able to see that I didn't just, I don't want to say, well, yeah, like that I didn't just cave to fear. I think that is what I want them to grow up seeing. And whether I survive to be 98 or not, like I want them to know that their mom showed up and that their mom showed up for them, but also showed up for herself. And I think that giving your diagnosis direction, like that's really what it is. It's showing up for yourself. And each of us deserves that. Every single one of you listening, you deserve to show up for yourself in some way. And if you haven't figured that out yet, like it's really okay. So anyway, you guys, I'm so glad that we were able to do this and that we could have this conversation. If there's, I guess I wanted to just end and let you guys each share one thing, like a couple sentences of like one thing that you would want somebody else listening to take away. If they're maybe in a similar spot as you. And then we can end from there. Lucy, do you want to go first?
Ooh, let me think.
Okay, it's okay. Take a sec.
I feel like one side of it, at least that's been really helpful for me lately, is realizing that I can practice, just because one scan week, I was just freaking out, a mess. I have practice. I've got more scans to come and more time to work on my skills and this, and honestly, shout out to therapists for helping guide that stuff. But like, just because you don't, just because sometimes you do cave to fear and sometimes you do, totally lose it, doesn't mean you can't learn from that and the next time do better. Like you have time to practice and it's fine if you don't get it right the first time.
I love that. Thank you. Linz, what about you?
Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone and remind them that giving purpose to your diagnosis doesn't have to be some big grandiose thing. Like you don't have to become a researcher and you don't have to become a public speaker. Like you can simply do things like my family and I started doing stay alive trips where we plan, 8, 12 months out for something really, really special. And even doing something really simple like that and giving you and the people around you something to look forward to can be really motivating and really powerful. So I don't want any takeaways to be, wow, I got to figure out what my what my life's purpose is with this
Yeah.
diagnosis. Like it can be something small. It can be like this week I want to find joy in learning a new skill, or this next week I want to find joy by starting that book that's been on my list for the last couple of years. Like it can be those simple pleasures that really do add up.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to therapy and also shout out to books. Like,
Yeah.
because I feel like
Yep.
sometimes books have been therapy for me. They've been so good. And I think you guys are two of the people that we all read some of the same books. So, you
Yep.
guys, books make a really big difference. Like, you can put yourself in the story in such different ways as a cancer patient. Anyway, well, you guys, thank you so much for listening. Huge thanks to all of our listeners. And to our guests, Linz and Lucy. Thanks so much for speaking and for being really just being part of this panel and this discussion. I echo what Linz said at the beginning. Like, I really hope this is something that helps give you the capacity to kind of just get out of the spiral if you're stuck in that little spiral. So please share this with somebody that you know. And huge thanks again to our sponsors who make this podcast possible. And they are, I mean, we really could not do what we do as at a Cure Insight without our sponsors. So huge thanks to them, and thanks again for listening. We'll see you guys next time.
And before you go,
Thank you.
say thanks to Danae for setting up this podcast. This, like, you were so dedicated to this, and I always want to throw that in there. Thank you.
Well, thank
Agreed.
you. I appreciate it. Thank you guys. All right, you guys, we'll see you next time.